traveling all over the world all the time, talking to great clients all over the world. And, you know, one of the things that I observe to all those clients is, in my opinion, in the opinion of Razorfish, the most digital region on the planet right now is Latin America, with Brazil being, I think, of the Latin American countries, the most interesting, right? It's the most, almost any metric you choose, Brazilians are the most digital people on Earth right now, which I think is incredibly exciting. On the other hand, there are some things that are going on here that are really, really depressing, namely digital budgets. And, you know, we're all digital people, we're all in the digital industry, and we all know these very depressing numbers, right? The previous slide, most digital people on the planet. This slide, some of the worst, some of the lowest budgets in the industry across the world. This is a problem, right? This is a kind of a puzzle that we're still trying to sort out. You know, again, there's cause for excitement, right? Because, you know, as we travel around, you see people like the CMO of Unilever really going, you know, with both feet into digital, really understanding how critical digital is to the future of their business, right? Unilever is one of the companies that has made kind of an across-the-board rule about digital, that all brands will begin investing in serious ways into digital. Very cause for excitement. On the other hand, back to reality here in Brazil, you have very important people in the advertising industry, particularly in the old world advertising industry, the conventional advertising industry, saying that television is the most important medium, and that it will be from now until forever. So this, I find, as a digital guy, I find this extremely depressing. And it's depressing because, again, you know, in other parts of the world, the United States is this chart. You know, here you see essentially the percentage of homes in the United States who are watching primetime television. This is the chart when I show this to TV people when they all start updating their resume. This is, you know, it's not a good time to be in the television business in the United States. You know, back to depression. And this, I think, is a chart that I want you guys to kind of burn in your memory because it's going to be important for the rest of my talk. So again, the most digital country on Earth, right? People spending more time in almost any way you want to measure it, more time online than anywhere on Earth. And yet, so you look at the spend, this is the share of media by media type, so print, television, radio, out-of-home, and internet, and the share of the media spend, right? So you see the sad part of this chart. Over here, you see Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. Really, at the very bottom of the share, right, for digital. And then you look at the amount that's spent on television, and it's way up at the very top. This is a huge cause for depression, because, again, it's a disconnect between the amount of time that Brazilians are spending online and the amount of money that agencies and brands are willing to spend to connect with those people. So it leaves you asking, you know, what is going on? Why is this happening here? And honestly, I don't think we have all the answers. You know, I know that this is an incredibly unique place, Brazil. And as Robert told you, I was trained as an anthropologist. So as an anthropologist, I do what I generally do, which is to go back to my roots, right? And I went and really took seriously some of what Darwin observed. I did some of his most important work in the neighborhood. And I want to tell a story that I think it maybe is kind of a parable about what's going on here. So most of us, I think if I did a show of hands, a poll, most of us would believe that evolution is something that occurs occurs over millions of years, right? That it's something that is sometimes a long time in the future, creatures evolve in order to suit their environment. It turns out that that's not true. That in fact, evolution can happen very, very fast, right? So Geospiza fortis was a particular kind of a finch, a very small bird. There are dozens and dozens of variations of this particular finch in the Galapagos Islands. So in the 70s, there was a terrible, terrible drought in the Galapagos Islands. A drought that was so severe, in fact, that many, many species of animals were entirely wiped out, right? Because there was no water for them to drink and nothing for them to eat. So Geospiza fortis was a creature that was deeply, deeply threatened because there were a number of different varieties, but they all had basically 4 different types of beaks. And their beaks were designed to suit their diet, right? So there were some birds, some of the species like the one we have left, that had big, heavy, powerful beaks. And those were used to crack nuts. They were very strong. And then there were some like on the lower right that were kind of little dainty beaks. And those were used to sort of get berries and insects out of tiny little places. So what happened during the drought was that a lot of the plants that different versions of this particular species fed on died. They withered and died. And so, again, you would think that it would take a long time for the bird to evolve in such a way that it could survive in this much, much, much harsher, more difficult environment. Again, they discovered in the 1970s that that wasn't true. That in fact, this particular species of bird evolved in a very short period of time, about 7 years, to suit this new environment. The entirely new developments, new beak structures, evolved within this bird species in order to suit the environment. So, believe it or not, I'd like to suggest that maybe, this is what's going on in Brazil, right? That I think, for those of us who grew up in the digital business, we sort of got used to being happy with whatever we could get, right? Being the sort of second-class citizen at the marketing table, and believing that at some point things would change. Some point in the future, things would change, and until that point, we make do, right? I really, really believe that that doesn't have to be the case. I really believe that right now, Brazil is at a kind of a crossroads, a turning point, and that things could change pretty quickly. Because I believe that it's not, in fact, the strongest creature, right, that's going to survive. It's the one that can change best and fastest. And if digital doesn't do anything, we know that digital changes fast, right? I feel like I have a completely different job every 18 months. The industry changes so fast, right? This is not the case, as you all know, of our offline brothers and sisters. They're still living maybe in the 60s or the 70s. They do not evolve fast. I think we're better suited to this new world. So, again, thinking like an anthropologist, I think that there are 3 things going on that Razorfish has observed about the market here, the world here, the people here, that are really unique. Some of them are unique in a great way, and some of them are unique maybe in not so great a way. We'll talk about those. So the first one is the one that Robert mentioned, the rise of the underclass, of the class C. There are a number of dynamics that are going on here, absolutely fascinating, but I think are going to change all of our jobs really, really quickly. We'll talk about that more. The second one, believe it or not, is the telenovela. Weirdly important and powerful, I think, in sort of what's going on in media here. And the last one is what I call the media strangle, and you all are all incredibly familiar with this, and that's where, in a few minutes, I'm going to get myself in trouble. So, Class C. Everybody is aware of Class C. When I arrived in Brazil and I saw that the sort of classes are segmented in this way. At first I was kind of horrified that there was such a kind of a very specific classification of people. I've grown accustomed to it now, and I understand the relevance of it. And the more I dig into it, the more I study it. And as Robert mentioned, we're doing a long, involved study over the course of the summer in Class C from an ethnographic standpoint. I discovered that this is a wildly misunderstood group. Right? There are so many beliefs about Class C that I think are frankly just kind of wrong, and that are pushing our ideas, our marketing programs in really problematic directions. The biggest myth is that they're kind of maybe nobody's customer. I've heard this again and again with clients. Oh, yeah, it's a big group, but really, they're not digital, or they're not right for my brand. The reality is that it's a giant chunk of the population, right? And perhaps even more than that. It's a giant chunk of the gross national product, right? And almost, half of them don't believe that they're Class C, right? They really think that they're kind of in a different group. And in fact, we're in the process of trying to relabel a segment of Class C, the new digital middle class. Because, in fact, this is not true either. This belief that they don't use the internet. They do use the internet. And they use the internet almost equally with the other classes, Class A and Class B. 58% own a computer, 8% that say they can't live without their computer. This year, 2010, they're almost half of the total internet market, 45%. So incredibly important. And again, most clients probably wouldn't believe this. They probably would have a very different set of assumptions. There is not super responsive. Another one, that they love television, and that they in fact prefer TV to the web. Not true. They do love television, but they see television on an equal plane with computers. And in fact, this year, 2009, in 2007, the number of computers sold surpassed the number of television, first time in history. Incredibly important statistic. And the possession of a computer is a real mark of status with Class C, and they also are using them to an incredible extent. I think it's even more interesting to look at the data about the sale of smartphones to Class C, the projections over the next 18 to 24 months. It is going to change everything. It's going to be the largest influx of a single demographic in the world to smartphones. Incredibly, it's almost very, very hard to imagine the impact of that on our marketing campaigns and on the way that people experience the internet. You guys probably know this. 90,000 LAN houses and growing every day. Hugely, hugely important. A lot of the work that we're doing, the ethnographic work that we're doing this summer, is spending time in LAN houses in order to really deconstruct the rhythms and routines, the behaviors that are going on within the LAN houses. Massive, massive engine for the emerging economy in Brazil. Again, hard to overestimate the importance of this. So on to the telenovela. Okay, so now this is audience participation. Who watches telenovelas? Come on. Really, really be honest. Be honest.
Nobody.
Okay. I'm not sure that you're being simple, but that's okay. So, hugely important. Camino goes in, yes, myself. I'm a big fan. Love the telenovela. And this is, again, a relatively unique phenomenon. Like, if you did this poll, in the United States, or you did this poll in Europe, you'd get people maybe wouldn't even know what it was, unless it was an audience of women who stay at home, which is increasingly a small audience. Incredibly important, incredibly culturally, economically, from a media standpoint, hard to overestimate. As Globo says, they have a Super Bowl every night. Very, very powerful. And it's powerful for real reasons, aside from the fact that it's entertaining, right? It sparks incredibly important cultural behavior, right? After Camila 2 years ago head shaved, 23,000 people donated bone marrow. Who would have thought? Very, very important, right? In Rio, there was a storyline that involved a child going missing, and that child was mentioned during the storyline of a show, and the child was recovered along with 63 other kids. Really important. And in Brazil, if you are within the signal of the lobo, the chances are just about 1 in 3, if you're under 30, that you were named after a soap opera character. Fantastic, right? Who knew? Incredibly important. So, we, I think, have a healthy appreciation and respect, and some of us, in fact, have a love for the telenovela. It's important, right? It's incredibly powerful. It's beloved, right? Important to acknowledge. When I talk to American audiences, for example, about this, they just start rolling their eyes. They don't understand because they haven't spent time. It's important. So television, does in fact, and telenovelas give us these amazing stories, cultural bonds to share with each other. And as you all know from your own digital people, TV is great, right? It gives us these cultural bonds. The internet actually lets us create our own stories. And Brazil, I think, is about to create the most interesting story on Earth. This is a country that's always been kind of about to happen. It's a country that is happening now. And it's going to happen, I think, more and more online. So, I talked about a drought at the beginning, and if there is the sort of the mother of all droughts, right, the king of all problems in Brazil, in Latin America generally, it's more severe and more confounding, I think, in Brazil than anywhere else. It's the media strangle. So this is where I get into trouble, right? It's very, very difficult to make observations like this as a gringo. Just coming here and trying to talk to you guys about your culture, your business, the media industry, and the incredible monopolies that are here. So I'm just going to walk right through the door and get myself in trouble. So again, I like to make things simple when I can. And when we really tried this, remember that one slide, right, where the 4% and the giant amount of television spent? That was a stumper for me. Trying to understand why that was we spent 2 or 3 months trying to figure out why that was. And at the end of it, we came up with kind of a simple idea. So if I were going to paint a picture of why that is, why that slide looks that way, that picture would look like that. It would look like the fox that's in the hen house, right? Anyone guess who the fox is? The fox is a conventional advertising agency, right? So here in Brazil, and throughout the world, in fact, clients generally trust their advertising agencies. They trust their advertising agencies with their brands, with their businesses, with their customer insight, and maybe most importantly, they trust the agencies with their money. They're going to spend their money, their budgets, their media budgets, in a way that will help build the business. Sometimes this trust is well placed, and then sometimes it isn't, right? And I think there's a kind of a system in place here that is, again, Gringo talking, deeply flawed. And we call the system Fox Math. We think that there's kind of an economic process, an exchange of value that's happening here that is really, really unique. And honestly, I think it's kind of the biggest open secret in Brazil. And so again, I'm going to be in trouble, and I'm just going to talk about it. So, you guys know this, I'm sure, but just to get it clear. So a client comes to an agency. They have some soup, right? It could be a car, it could be a computer. It's a soup here. So the client has some soup, and the client wants to sell the new soup. So they go to the agency and they say, hey, I've got this soup, and I have a budget of about $80 to sell my soup. And the agency says, great, we love soup, we love you, we have a lot of ideas, but the bad thing about it is that our ideas, we have all these great ideas, and our ideas are going to cost $100 to produce, right? And the client says, well, I'm sorry, love your ideas, you know, we don't have $100, we have $80. So what does the agency do? The agency goes to the broadcaster, we all know who that is, and they say, look, we have $100 worth of ideas to help sell this soup. What can you do for me? And the broadcaster says, well, guess what? We have this thing called the BV, and we're going to give you back $38, right? And so now the client, the agency, can afford to make their $100 idea. As long as the $100 idea is a television spot. So almost, and this particular dynamic right there, the client knows that it's going on. The client would prefer not to know necessarily. They know what's going on. And frankly, it's the reason that they can afford to have a low budget. Right? Because in fact, the idea is a $100 idea. The client has been trained, because they know that this is going on, to believe that they don't have to pay $80 for a $100 idea, because they know their margin is coming, the agency's margin is going to come from the BD. It's so weird to me. It probably seems really obvious to you, and it's completely legal, of course, but it's a really weird system. And frankly, it's a system that has been outlawed in most other countries, because you know the right answer is always going to be a television spot, if that's where you make your money. That's what agencies are always going to produce. So this is the aha for us. How can we wonder why our budgets are so small? Why we're all really, really tired all the time? Because we're running on that treadmill for 4%. Right? Again, this is a broken system, but it's really, to me, sort of obvious why this is happening. Again, totally, completely legal, but it's a really busted system. And it's broken because it does not acknowledge that fundamental fact that Brazilians are the most digital people on earth, and Brazilian digital campaigns are the most underfunded. This is why. Because of Fox Mac. So we ask this question, so who's so addicted to television? Is it audiences? No, right? We know that people are watching TV just about as much as they're spending time online. It's not the audiences. It's really not the advertisers either. The advertisers are just trusting their client. They're trusting their agencies to do the right thing with their money. So we believe, Razorfish believes, that the fundamental problem is the agency, and that the client has been trained to underpay for ideas because of the BV. I'm going to get in huge trouble for this. So, what does it take? What's it going to take, right? You guys probably, I'm sure you all know this, right? So what's it going to take for it to change? We don't want to just shove a big pile of problems into the middle and say, oh, that really sucks. So we think that there are some things that we can all do, right? We think, in fact, there are 5 things. We're all digital people, and so these are all things that I think we can do in our daily jobs. So the first one is to be in the education business. Really, really. We all think, I think in some ways we think we're in the idea business, or we're in the technology business, or whatever, but I think very few of us think that we're in the education business. I think I've been at Razorfish for a long time, and once upon a time I used to have to go in and educate clients what a URL was. Thank God we don't have to do that so much anymore, but we're still in the education business, right? Constantly educating clients about the web and why the web is important. And here I think it's a lot about why the web is important vis-a-vis television, right? If all of your clients went to their conventional agency and said, hey, would you explain the BV to me? This would be a very different place in a year, because that's an uncomfortable conversation. That's a really uncomfortable conversation. The second thing is creative evolution. So, Robert mentioned that I live in Rio, and the other place that I live half the time is just right under that O. So this is a particularly upsetting ad, personally. But I think it's upsetting for other reasons. And I used to run the creative group at Razorfish, so I get awards, and I get how important awards are. But they are really too important here. There's an absolute crazy obsession with awards. And I think it keeps the industry kind of stuck, right? Because creatives can do more than produce things like this. They can actually impact business. They can actually change the game rather than, do well at con. So I think that, the creative industry here needs to evolve. Very important. Push creatives harder. This third thing, agencies need to be more clear about where the money's going and why it's going there. Again, the uncomfortable conversation about the BV will change everything, right? I wouldn't hold your breath on that, but I think we need to push clients, push them to ask, so your budget is 4%. Why? So you're spending 10 million reais on a TV spot, and I've got 10,000 to build a microsite. Why? We need more bold clients that really get digital and are really willing to push. Bradesco, I think, is one of them. So they're spending almost a third of their total marketing budget online. Really important. We have more clients like that. Again, our industry would be a very different place in a year. The last idea really is we need bigger, bolder ideas. And I think this comes from us, right? Because clients, again, I think most clients still are in the education mode. They may or may not arrive at big ideas without our help. I think that's our job, to sort of swing for the fences, think big, think beyond marketing. Think about how digital can actually transform a business and impact the business at a fundamental level. So, I think, again, digital, I think, has always been a bit of a ghetto, right? It's been filled with passionate people who believe that, like Brazil, that, at some point, we're going to turn the corner. At some point, we're going to achieve our promise. I think the time is now, right? And if it's not you guys, who's it going to be? I think we have to all be a little bit more of a troublemaker, right? And frankly, I don't like being the only one, so I'd love to have company being a troublemaker. It's time to be a revolutionary. It really is. And, our belief as a Razorfish is that in the bullseye is this guy. We have to get our clients to reject FoxMap. It just, frankly, is not going to change until that happens. Our Razorfish position is that we're totally transparent, right? We don't believe in the BV. We are very clear about where we spend our money and why. And, and sometimes, frankly, the answer is not digital. And we're happy to walk away from it if it's not the right answer. So, we don't believe in FoxMap. We're not going to engage in it. We've made it very clear it's going to make us, I would suspect, incredibly unpopular with a lot of people, but probably not with clients. Because clients, I think, are beginning to get a whiff that they're being hoodwinked. We think it's time to be a big Finch. We think it's time to evolve. This is an advertisement. We're hiring. We're open for business. We announced that we're opening yesterday, in fact, and we're up and running here in Brazil. So if you guys feel like revolutionaries, if you know anyone who's a revolutionary, Razorfish is the place to be. I can promise you that. Thank you very much. Questions, Jim? Yeah?
Three points I came out of from that. First is, agencies. But in Portuguese it works really nice. It's called agenciando, which in other words can be translated as prostitution. So if you want another item to get some people pissed off at you, they will use that one. Agencying something else, which is the gift. The second is education. We're in a business that's the crest of the wave. So we personally are going to spend 80% of our time educating possible clients so that they can become our clients in 2 or 3 years.
Right. I think that is just part of the cycle.
And the federal ballot. 5 years ago, I had 4 different friends in the U.S. whose wives wanted to call their newborn boys Aiden. Aiden is, who are the women here? It was the boyfriend of the Sex and the City girl. So it doesn't work just when you tell them about it.
That was a very sophisticated.
And when my wife wanted to call our boy Aiden, I looked it up and it means little rocket. So again, that I did. Any questions?
Alô? Bom, obrigado. Eu também sou gringo e também trabalho aqui em São Paulo. Também comparto sua visão. Eu também tenho uma coisa que não consigo explicar, que acho que a matemática da Raposa explicou, que é o mercado tão maduro digital como o Brasil é o único lugar que ainda existem os portais. Talvez a matemática da Raposa também explique a existência dos portais.
He basically wants to know why Brazil is such a digitally advanced market is so dependent on the portals.
Why the portals are so powerful here?
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? There's another anomaly, and one of our favorite clients here is Terra. So we've spent about 3.5 years studying portals, and there's a different kind of dynamic here. And frankly, I'm not sure. When I first started working with Dow, I was like the predictor of gloom and doom. You know, that the portals here would evolve similar to portals in other places. And in most other markets, portals have become less important, right? People are more interested in verticals and less interested in horizontals. It's not the case here, right? I think people, Brazilians, and it's happened all through Latin America, depend on the portal as the place to go, right? Terra is perhaps unique because they were also an ISP and continue to be an ISP, so they had an interesting kind of on-ramp for people when they came online. But so what we're seeing now is that they're just as important, and in fact more important. Now, I don't know this because we haven't completed the work with Class C, but my gut tells me that Class C is going to come online largely through portals too. And that's going to be a giant, massive wave of people coming online in kind of unprecedented levels. So I think what's going to be interesting is watching, and this is part of the evolving strategy of Terra, is to create, continue with the excellent horizontal content experience, but also to provide increasingly narrow and relevant vertical content and products and experiences. So I don't have any really complete answer for you about why the portals are so important here, other than it appears to have been the way that a lot of people have come online, and they've stayed relatively loyal with them. And I wouldn't look for them to become less important anytime soon. In fact, I would bet they're going to become more important.
Joe, a quick observation before a question here. I don't claim to be an anthropologist. which then ties into Class C and E. They're going to spend a lot more time than they do today, which is about an hour and a half on public transportation. They're probably going to spend 3 hours. And if our President Lula decides to implement his broadband internet backbone, that means that mobile is going to be one of the largest accesses or medias for Class C and D in Brazil, or probably Latin America.
That's absolutely true. And again, some of the work that we have completed so far with the study is that roughly 50 to 70 million members of Class C, their next big purchase is going to be a smartphone. So, and that is one of the drivers, right? And so, if, I don't normally give out stock tips, but if I were going to give a stock tip, I would say invest in the smartphone industry or the internet backbone in Brazil. Incredibly, it is going to happen. People are going to access the web in an unprecedented way in Brazil. And so, if you're not already talking to your clients about what their mobile strategy is, you need to start right away.
Hi, I come from Venezuela, and the situation is exactly the same in the Foxman. After 13 years in the internet business, I realized that advertisers are not dogs. They really know what happened. The thing is that in Venezuela, there's a monopolistic dominance from TV stations and newspapers, and that gives them a huge control over the budgets because, believe me, no brand wants to mess with the huge power they have. I don't know if in Brazil happens this, but that's the case in Venezuela.
It's good. It's good to hear, and it's terrible for you. I'm sorry. Yeah, it sucks.
Any more questions? I have a quick one. Why Razorfish?
Honestly, everybody asks that, and I wish I had a good, smart, funny answer. There really isn't one. The founders of the company were on an island with a bunch of funders, early funders, and they realized they didn't have a name. The funders were saying, "What's the name?" And they kind of ran out into the lobby of the hotel. And the legend is that they opened a phone book and pointed at a word. There's no, for a guy who cares about brands and branding and brand strategy and having a disciplined approach to naming, none. There's no reason. But you'll see, if you go to Razorfish offices all over the world, you'll see we at least have a fish tank.
Joe, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you guys.